Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Diana AI6DF, which stands for Amateur and Six Land Diana Feinberg. Virgin call sign, that's what I wanted. Anyway, I'm also ARRL Los Angeles Section Manager, for those of you who weren't aware. I've also been involved in a lot of other aspects of ham radio, one of which is the Los Angeles County Disaster Communications Service, which is a RACES type group overseen by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. I've been the training officer also of that group since before I became LAX section manager. And this presentation had its basis for a DCS, LAC DCS quarterly training last August. Since then, almost every slide in this talk has been changed. This is such a dynamic growth category that things happen literally by the week. And in fact, I went online this afternoon, and most of these solar generator companies are having Valentine's Day and President's Day sales, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so let's get to it. And first, let me just say, we're talking here about portable solar generators. If you came here expecting to learn about a whole home solar generator, this is not the talk for you. Whole home solar generators are typically $15,000 to $35,000, at least around here, require a licensed electrician and whatever. We're looking at units you can take with you and that would also serve you at a public service event and other aspects of ham radio, and as you'll find out, many other aspects of your personal life. Okay, so let's get to it. What we're going to talk about is what is a solar generator, just to clear the air. Secondly, why you should consider buying one of these, and there are more uses than you might realize. Third, we're going to talk about the unusual market and industry characteristics of this category. This is a category that has come out of the embryonic stage. It's now in a very high growth stage. At some point, industry consolidation will take place, but we're not there yet. Then we'll talk about choosing a portable solar generator and the key decisions you need to make, starting with what type of lithium battery you want and your power strategy, and then how you might go about differentiating the various models. Whoops, excuse me. And then we'll also, excuse me, we got to get something out of the way here. Okay, we'll talk briefly about solar panels to power these things, what might be best for you given your circumstances. And lastly, we'll talk about, is building a do-it-yourself solar generator worth it? I'm going to answer that question right from the start and say, if you're here to find out how to build one, you'll be very disappointed, because my recommendation after going through everything is that it's not worth it to build it. Buy one instead, and you'll see why when we get there. So if you came here to look for a DIY thing, you may want to QSY. Okay, let's get to our next slide. Okay, so what is a solar generator? Well, basically, you mix some kind of solar panel with a battery storage device, and that battery storage device can give you both AC and DC power options. So what you have in one box is a maximum PowerPoint tracker solar charge controller, a very large or moderate size to large lithium type battery, and there are several types, and then very critically, a battery management system to control the charging, the discharging, and monitor the temperature, and make sure your system is not going to go over the limits and cause some kind of a fire or other incident. These boxes also have a DC to AC inverter and various types of AC and DC power distribution. These are just two examples of some devices out there, along with solar panels that these companies make. One thing about all of these devices is that you can charge these not just with a solar panel, but also from AC mains power. Almost all these devices come with an AC charger, and they all have a loud fan, so be advised, you're pumping a lot of wattage in, and there will be a fan in the charger to keep things cool, because it may take 3 or 4 hours to fully charge. And you can also charge these from your vehicle lighter adapter while you drive. It might take about 8 hours to fully charge a unit, but at least you can drive for a day and get it charged. Okay, so it's hard to find photos of what's inside these boxes. Nobody shows a complete diagram for proprietary purposes, but in a nutshell, here's from EcoFlow, which is one of the brands. this is an example of what's inside. You have a lithium battery, in this case, a lithium iron phosphate battery. And then above it is a battery management system that also has fans that help keep this box cool and prevent any kind of a fire. Also on EcoFlow is unique in that many of their units have the DC outlets on the front and the AC outlets on the back. Most of the units you'll see have all the outlets on one panel. Here's a typical box, and I'm going to use this just for illustrative purposes so you can see what's going on here. Going around, they all have some kind of an input area, and in this case, this is where you'd put in your AC power adapter. And in the case of this brand called Jackery, they use Anderson power poles as the power input. Unfortunately, what's missing on these for all ham radio purposes is there are no power pole outputs. There are other DC outlets, but they aren't quite suited for ham radio. We'll talk about that. Then usually, or actually every one of these boxes has some kind of a display that looks roughly like this, showing you the charge level of the battery. And then while you're charging it, it shows you how many watts are coming in, whether from the AC mains charger or your solar panel, and then how many watts are going out. Then these boxes also have a DC distribution section and an AC one. And you have to push a button to turn on the respective section. So here, this unit has a 12-volt, 10-amp auto type socket, has a USB-C connector, but here the big problem with this box is that they don't mark the USB-C power output level. They come in 45 watts, 65 watts, and 100 watts. You'll see 100 watts is USB-C is what you need to charge a MacBook computer or many of the new Dell, Lenovo, or HP units. And then this one also has some USB-A connections. And then over to the right, you see the AC power connection. And they almost always will list the maximum wattage. You never want to exceed that. And so if this unit here can handle a maximum of 1,000 watts, it means you're not going to be able to handle a large microwave oven, probably not a hair dryer. So just be aware you don't want to blow out your box, and make sure you plan accordingly. If you do need higher wattage outputs, then look for maybe a 2200 watt hour device, but you're going to find those boxes are extremely heavy. Okay, we talked briefly, what is a solar generator? Why should you consider buying one? Well, more reasons than you think. First of all, I'm going to talk about California, and we have to clear the air about what's going on with carbon-fueled generators. The state of California has mandated that beginning in January next year, most new gasoline-fueled small engines are banned in California. The fact is, according to the California Air Resources Board, one leaf blower, a gasoline-powered leaf blower, operating for 1 hour generates as much pollution and particulates as a Toyota Camry going from LA to Denver. These are very, very inefficient devices. At my house and here at my mother's house, where I'm staying with her to get her through the pandemic and all, we have to close the windows when the gardeners come. Okay, now in January 2028, this is where a big change happens with generators. New gasoline-powered generators cannot be sold in California after that date. Now, there are a couple of big loopholes. First of all, loophole one is that you can still sell new diesel or propane-powered generators, just not gasoline-powered ones. If you have an existing gasoline generator, you may still use it. It's not banned. You may resell that generator and keep it running till it dies. Loophole number two is you can always drive to Arizona or Nevada and buy one of these banned devices and bring it back. But anyway, gasoline generators will be around for a while, but these portable solar generators offer quite a few advantages. So what are those advantages? Well, they can power a lot of your non-radio devices. I use bioenno batteries for my radios, but will use these solar generators for recharging the computers, the batteries, for handheld units and other things. But the big thing is obviously no carbon fuels are required, and so they're relatively safe to store. Best of all, no fumes, carbon monoxide, or noise. You can use these inside. and they work just fine. They're easier to maintain. You don't have to change the oil. You don't have to put Sta-Bil into the gasoline to keep that going. Compared to a lot of fuel generators, there are small solar generators that are very light and easy to move around. And they offer you a lot of flexibility for charging essential devices. They're not going to power your whole house, but for the key things you need besides your radio, they'll keep things going. They're also beneficial if you have a critical home medical device like a CPAP machine or some other oxygen device. Some of these units also can function as an uninterruptible power source. Now, unfortunately, when you use them as a UPS, it's not always an instant. There might be a 1 second lag between the shift to the battery. So if you have something critical, you might lose some data, or hopefully your device doesn't choke. But anyway, there's a lot of flexibility in these. So what are the uses? Well, obviously, power outages. We all have those. For those of you outside of California, we have something called Flex Alerts. This is where the California Independent System Operator that oversees the electric grid for the state tries to match the demand for electricity with the available supplies. And if the grid appears to be really stressed, they'll issue a Flex Alert asking everyone to conserve their electricity for the next 4 hours or so. And if people don't do that, then we might have what are called rotating brownouts, and everyone has a 4-character field on their electric bill that tells you what rotating outage group you're in. Okay, besides outages, these devices also give you some additional or temporary AC outlets, especially if you live in an older home. Where I am now, this home of my mother's was built in 1953. This room I'm in, bedroom, was never intended to be a home office. No one ever expected computers, laser printers, the paper shredder, and everything else to be in a room like this. So if I have some other devices I need to use in here, I'll take out the solar generator, and using its stored power, I can power other devices. What are the other uses? Well, it should be obvious. Camping, if you have a recreational vehicle, you can even use this in your car, hopefully not while driving, but you can power AC devices when you come to a stop or whatever. Number 4 is obviously a key one here, public service events. I'm going to be taking one of my boxes to the LA Marathon next month and using it for powering an over-the-air TV set, so I can watch the live broadcast of the LA Marathon from our net control point. Also, you have the ability, number 5, to use this for outside your house for portable power. Say you have a party in your backyard. This way you don't have extension cords going all over the place to power your lighting or sound or whatever you have. I'm heavily into photo and video stuff as well, and I've used mine for powering studio lights outside to get rid of shadows and everything. Number 7 is really big. You can recharge all of your handheld batteries in the field. And this can be especially important if you have a Part 90 commercial radio. Many of them will not charge well at 12 volts. They require 14 to 16 volts, especially if you have like a Motorola radio. And the reason why is that you'd want to use an AC outlet here, and the power charging dock that Motorola has, because they have circuitry in there that tries to optimize the use and charging and reconditioning of their batteries. Of course, you can also use this for power tool batteries, camera batteries, phones, everything else, your drone. So a lot of use in the outside world. And then, as I mentioned, there is the ability to use this as a UPS. And if you have a health problem with one of these electric powered devices, that can be very, very important to you. Okay, so we talked about why you might want to consider one of these besides just for power outages and ham work. What does this market and industry look like? Well, the bottom line is that it's sort of a wild west right now. This market, as I mentioned, is in a rapid growth phase, and this kind of talk gets me excited because that was my former job. I was vice president of planning for a very large food company, and my work involved looking at where's this market going, how's it going, and how is this industry going to consolidate. Almost all of these names in this industry are relative unknowns. There are no household names in this industry right now, except for Generac, which is a generator maker. But Generac has just 2 models made for them by somebody else, and they're not really into this. They want to still sell their gasoline and diesel powered generators. This is just a handful of brands. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, Goal Zero was really the innovator of this starting in 2009. Renogy came around in 2010, Jackery in 2012, EcoFlow was in 2017. I think Fluidity came around 2014 or 2015. Green Power came into this market in 2020. Anchor, which you may know for a lot of computer accessories and chargers, got into this starting, I think, around 2020, 2021. Anyway, that's the way it goes. And Bouge RV, I believe, has been around since about 2014. More brands are out there and more are coming because this is a growth market. Okay, before we go on, we have the mandatory disclosure. All brand names and logos are registered trademarks, so we don't want to ignore that. If I had to speculate what brand name might come on the market at some point before the consolidation takes place, I mean, there's no Honda in here or Briggs and Stratton or things like that. I would speculate that a couple of power tool makers like DeWalt or Milwaukee might find this a tempting market to come up with a ruggedized unit that would work on construction sites to not only recharge all their tool batteries, but also be used for other purposes on the site. Anyway, that remains to be seen. That's just personal speculation. Okay, so it's a high growth market and it's a global market, but even though it's a global market, there is not a global consumer for this product. And that might be why some of the big names, worldwide names, have not jumped in, why there's no Sony, no Panasonic, or folks like that. One of the biggest problems that makes this not a market for everyone is that not everybody has the room for solar panels. But for that matter, they may not even have the room to store them. Why? It turns out that a lot of people live in apartments, condos, or other high density buildings. In the US, it's estimated about 20% of US households live in these kinds of buildings, whereas in Western Europe, for example, 50% of the households are in apartments or high-rise buildings. And I was astounded in doing the research for this that in Germany, 56% of households are in apartments. In Greece, it's about 61%. And in Poland, which has a more agrarian economy, only 43%. But still, that's pretty high. These are people, some may have a balcony, but you may only have exposure to the sun for a few hours each day. Here in the US, the reason why it's so low, as you may know, is that the US has benefited from financial policies that have allowed a very robust home mortgage market, and also taxation policies that allowed the deductibility of mortgage interest and property taxes. And we've also had the advantages of a lot of land that encouraged urban sprawl, plus much cheaper gasoline prices than much of Western Europe. So basically, we're a nation of homeowners, but not every homeowner, even here, is going to benefit from a solar generator. Why? There are people who, even though you have a home, you're not going to have enough sunlight. Yes, there are some that live in high latitudes, like maybe Scandinavia, Northern Canada, Alaska. But here in LA, we have a lot of people living in canyons or on the side of a hill, and you only have sun for half a day, maybe even less. Also in the big city like LA, there are places where single family homes are right next to like a 4-story or 5-story apartment building, and there isn't any sun in your backyard for much of the day. On a worldwide scale, the costs of these plus the panels are still too high for the most impoverished people. It can be like 2 years' income. For some, these would be great in rural areas and parts of Africa and Asia. Nevertheless, this market is projected to grow by different estimates 11 to 17% annually over the next 5 years. But despite that, it still hasn't attracted big names for now. But it may happen when the industry finally consolidates. So since I first gave this presentation in August 2022, we've had some major developments. The biggest thing is more brands are suddenly switching to lithium iron phosphate batteries, i.e. bioNO type batteries, in their newer models. And they're doing this both for cost and safety reasons. We'll get into that in a minute. What's happened in the last 6 months and continuing even as we speak this week, just go onto Amazon and you'll see it. There are a lot of price wars and discounting going on as all these new brands are duking it out for market share. Some of these brands are even changing their solar panel connector types. And so their fleet will have, say, Anderson power pole connectors in certain models, and then a DC connector in other models. New brands, as I mentioned, are coming, but this industry so far has also become somewhat of a victim of its own success. When you read reviews on Amazon and elsewhere, there are plenty of complaints about people not being able to reach customer support for help. But I think in reading about some of the complaints, the people making the complaints don't know much about electronics, so they're probably not hams. But if there's a ham in there and they have a complaint, it probably is a valid one. But do read the reviews on each of these, and definitely look at the 1 and 2 star reviews to see if you're missing anything. Okay. There are no industry standards. That's one thing you have to get over. And this is almost like the early days of the PC industry. We had a lot of embryonic market situations where there were different kinds of connectors and things. Here's an example of what you thought might be a standard, Anderson power poles in 3 different configurations. So on the left, you see a Jackery unit where the black ground is on the right. A Bouge RV stacks them vertically, but puts the ground on the left. And then in a RockPals units, they stack them vertically with the ground on the bottom. So there are no standards, and just realize that. Okay, we've talked about what this market is like and why you should get one. Let's go into some of the characteristics you might want to think about in choosing one of these units. As I mentioned, I currently own 3 of these, and I'm in the market now for a 4th. I've seen a lot of potential for these, at least in my life, and hopefully in yours as well. Okay, so what would you want to look at in choosing a solar generator? Whoops. First, you need to make a key decision on what kind of lithium-ion battery or lithium battery you want. The market seems to be moving more to the lithium iron phosphate battery from lithium ion. This table says a lot. There are 5 different types of lithium batteries, and we're going to go over each of these, and you'll see what's happening here. On the left, we have lithium titanium oxide, and then lithium iron phosphate, which is where this market seems to be moving. In the middle, lithium manganese oxide, moving over lithium cobalt oxide, which is the most widely used lithium ion polymer batteries. And then on the far side, you have lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide, which are the most expensive because of the rare minerals they use in there. Okay, let's look at the differences in these. The key things are the energy density. How many watt hours per liter of volume does each of these technologies offer? And yeah, there are some other studies that have come up with slightly different numbers, but they're generally in the same ballpark range. So here, lithium titanium oxide batteries have about 177 watt hours per liter. They can go through about 3,000 to 7,000 charge cycles. And you find these in things like solar street lighting, and UPS power systems, like the lights you see inside an office building, emergency lighting, whatever. So you want to have a lot of charge cycles, but you don't need a lot of current to really get these things going. You're not driving motors, for example. Okay, the next thing, lithium iron phosphate batteries have almost double the amount of energy density, 333 watt hours per liter, get about 2,000 to 4,000 charging cycles, which is good for us in ham purposes. And it's good for a lot of applications that need endurance and high current. In the middle, lithium manganese oxide batteries give even more energy density, 420 watt hours, but you'll notice only about 300 to 700 charge cycles. What are these heavily used for? Power tools. This is where DeWalt, Milwaukee, and Makita are going to make their money by contractors wearing out their batteries after about 2 years of charging. But the higher watt hours is good for the higher torque needed for certain tools like drills and saws and whatever. Okay, now the most widely used battery, the one we find in all of our phones, our cameras, our laptops, a lot of small devices, and some um, portable cell solar generators are lithium cobalt oxide. And you can see these have almost 66% more energy density in terms of watt hours per liter than lithium iron phosphate. So what that means is that you can pack a lot more power into the same size package, or conversely, offer have a smaller box that offers a big amount of power. But notice the number of charge cycles is only about half that of, or a fourth rather, of lithium iron phosphate. And if all of us with our cell phones, we know the cell phone battery doesn't last forever, and neither does your tablet battery or laptop battery as well. So clearly lithium iron phosphate has far more charge cycles. And then lastly, on the far right, you see lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide batteries that offer a little bit more energy density, but they offer about twice the charge cycles of lithium cobalt oxide. And these batteries have been used in electric vehicles, e-bikes, e-scooters. Well, guess what? Think about where all the fires with lithium ion batteries have occurred. It's with these two categories on the far right. What they're doing essentially is packing a lot of power into a small space. And when you charge or discharge power, you're going to have heat dissipation somewhere. And the question is, how well is that heat managed to prevent thermal runaway where you suddenly have a fire? And so this is where lithium iron phosphate batteries appear to have an advantage. Yes, they have less power per liter or per kilogram, if you will, but they give you 2 to 4 times more charge cycles. And so in the long run, they will last longer. But because there's less power packed into that space, you're less likely to have a thermal runaway. The numbers I saw indicate that for a lithium ion polymer battery, thermal runaway starts at around 310, 320 degrees, whereas lithium iron phosphate, the thermal runaway is about closer to 500 degrees. So you have a lot more latitude before a lithium iron phosphate battery goes up in flames, but because it doesn't get that hot with less power or heat being dissipated, you're less likely to have it in the first place. So this is where the market seems to be going. And by the way, the car makers are increasingly shifting to lithium iron phosphate as well. The batteries on the far right is what Tesla had been using for their extended range vehicles. But Rivian, an electric vehicle startup, is now using lithium iron phosphate. Ford's new F-50 vehicle is also lithium iron phosphate. So is the Ford Mustang Mach vehicle. And GM is also looking at this. There's another reason why, besides safety. These lithium cobalt type things have become very expensive due to price increases in cobalt and manganese, whereas iron and phosphates of the type needed for these are relatively plentiful and cheap. By the way, cobalt for a number of years had been about $30,000 a ton. For much of last year, for the first 7 months, it was $85,000 a ton. It has now cratered a bit because of the recession and people moving over to lithium iron phosphate. But anyway, it's the cobalt that creates a little more, shall we say, flammability and fire potential. Okay, so after you've considered what type of battery do you want, what are you safe with, you have to figure out what kind of a watt hour rating do you need? What kind of needs do you have? And more importantly, the price you want to pay per watt hour. We'll talk about that in a minute. How much do you want to carry? Some of these bigger devices that have like 2,200 watt hours weigh 62 pounds. That's as much or more as many generators. If you need to take this in and out of your house, do you really want to carry this up all the stairs? Here in Southern California, we have a lot of homes on hillsides, and the garage is at street level, and you have to walk up a lot of stairs to get to the house. You have to figure out also what's your charging and use strategy. Are you better off with multiple smaller units or one big one? I opted for having multiple smaller units and a distributed power strategy. Back in December, we had here at this house a 17-hour power outage. So I had one of my units in a room my mother uses, so she could watch television, and we also plugged in the amplified over-the-air TV antenna. She also could have a lamp on and some other stuff going in there. I had a unit in my room for the computers and other stuff, and we had another unit in the kitchen. So I decided it was better to have a distributed power strategy than one huge unit and run cords all over the house. On terms of the outputs and the maximum wattage, this is one thing you may want to really look at if you want to recharge a more modern computer that has USB-C power delivery. Some of these units, as I mentioned, are capable of 100-watt USB-C power delivery. That is ideal for a MacBook or a Dell, Lenovo, recent HP model. They require that much. So basically, you're getting 5 amps at 20 volts. There are other USB-C outputs on some of these boxes that only go to 45 watts. Might work for your iPad, but not for your computer. And you need to figure out what's the maximum wattage you want to put into or pull out of this box. If you want to power a refrigerator or maybe your microwave, even if you do have a high-powered microwave, like an 1800-watt one, you may want to run it at, say, power level 5, just to stay within the limit. You also want to consider how you're going to be charging this, from solar panels, mostly AC or whatever. And lastly, how much do you want to spend? We all have different resource levels and different commitments, but to me, it was worth it because we have power outages here. This house here is also near the ocean. We're about 3 blocks up from the ocean. The marine air here is very corrosive to metals, and the electric system often has transformers on poles that blow because of corrosion, and stuff happens. Let's put it that way. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're not looking at whole house units. This is not going to power your entire house. It's just critical devices. So on the next few slides, I'm going to gloss over this because all the numbers have changed, but we're looking at basically units under $1,600 without panel, basically weight under 30 pounds, with charge controller inverter available for retail or use or whatever. Okay, so what I want to get across is, first of all, determining one of the criteria you might want to look at for buying these, and that is the dollar per watt hour. So here I took a bunch of models for the different brands. Here, these are Jackery and Goal Zero units. These prices were as of August 2022, and the prices have come down a bit since then with all the promotions. But back then, the average was about $1.03 per rated watt hour. And so you can see with Jackery, what was interesting was their smaller units had a lower cost per watt hour than the bigger units. Normally, you would think you'd get some economies of scale by getting a larger unit, but that wasn't the case. Goal Zero, which innovated this product category, seems to have a very high cost, and they'll have to deal with it. And one way they have dealt with it in the last 6 months is they're focusing primarily now on bigger units, like 2,000 watt hours, 3,000 watt hours, things that are more for your whole house. And then here's just some other brands I looked at, and you'll notice the Bluetti brand had a very interesting feature. Their price per watt hour was way below the $1.03 at that time. And in particular, you can see one here, a 716 watt hour unit, at the time priced for $569 for $79. Why was that? Well, it turns out that because of the excuse me. Okay, this also reflects the fact that they were using lithium iron phosphate batteries, which I think had a lower price than the cobalt infused lithium batteries. I ended up getting 3 of these. And to show you how crazy the pricing is, for my first one, I paid $569. About a month later, I got another one for $519. And by the way, the $569 was down from the list price of $599. I got my third one for $449. And it's just crazy what's going on, but it's all for the consumer. Okay, the next thing to look at besides the price per watt hour is how many watt hours do you get per pound? In other words, how much do you want to carry and what are you getting from it? And you can see different models. Here, we're pretty much in a consistent range of about 35 to 45 watt hours per pound, except the Bluettis. They had fewer watt hours per pound, and that really reflected the lower energy density that the lithium iron phosphate batteries had at the time. And that's a key thing here. Last August, Bluetti was about the only brand that had lithium iron phosphate batteries across almost all of its products. The other brands were almost entirely lithium ion. That has started changing. So do look at them. So anyway, here's what I wound up with. I'm not endorsing it. I have no interest in financially or otherwise in this company. But what it offered was they claimed 2,500 plus charge cycles to at least 80% capacity, 4 AC outlets, 2 100-watt USB-C power delivery ports, and then 2 USB-A ports, standard USB 5 volts. And then they also had 2 regulated DC outlets. Now, these are the barrel connectors many of you may be familiar with. They come in several sizes. One of the limitations of these DC connectors is that they're rated at only 10 amps. They were not designed for high power. And it also indicates what's missing from all of these units so far. There are no Anderson power poles as outputs. If there were, then the output could handle more than 10 amps easily and be better suited for some other radio transmission uses. Anyway, this unit also has a 15-watt wireless charging pad on the top, so you don't need to take up one of these slots to charge your new iPhone, and takes a maximum input of 200 watts. Every one of these units, no matter what brand, will have a maximum input wattage, and you don't want to put in more than that, although you can go slightly over the limit because no solar panel is likely to give you 100% efficiency. But I found the charger on this unit, even though the maximum input is 200 watts, when I look at the power input on the screen here, it's exactly 195 watts. It never goes over that. So you don't want to go over your rated limit. Okay, and it recharges from a wall outlet in about 3 to 4 hours, or from your car in about 7 to 8. Once again, I'm not endorsing this. I'm just telling you what I bought. And I bought 3 of these so that if the charger fails on one or I lost one, I could still cannibalize one of the other units. Okay, currently the lowest cost per watt hour I found last week on Amazon was 56 cents. This is a startup brand that went into business in 2020. And you can see this is an example of what's going on Amazon. $499, click here to apply a $100 coupon. You go on and you'll see all of these apply coupon amounts and the cost comes down. So, okay. All right, let's talk quickly about panels and we'll be done for the day. What's best for you? Well, all of the solar generator makers have, for the most part, some kind of very portable panel that's configured to work perfectly with your unit. Why? Because they have a connector that matches yours. And it turns out these brands use different connectors, believe it or not. Some will use Anderson power pole. Some have DC barrel connectors. Others use an XTO connector. So there is no uniformity. Some of these panels also come, at least third-party portable panels, will come with a wire cord, a cable coming out with like 4 different connectors: a power pole, a DC 5.5 millimeter jack, and a DC 8 millimeter jack, and then an Anderson power pole, so that it's more universal with different brands. But anyway, if you do buy the pricey, overpriced panels from your brand, you can be assured everything will be correct and it aesthetically matches the color of your and tone of your station. But I do have to caution you that they have these tilt angle legs in the back, and some of the tilt angles aren't all that adjustable. You're sort of stuck at 1 or 2 feasible angles, but you will have to rotate your panels around as the sun traverses during the day if you want maximum solar power. Okay, now for less money, you can buy third-party panels. And third-party panels include some portable ones like the ones on the previous page. And by the way, almost all these panels now are monocrystalline, which are much better than the polycrystalline ones of the past. Never exceed the maximum input wattage of your unit. As I mentioned, most of these panels yield less than a little under 90% of their rating. And the cable connectors and polarity for third-party panels can vary, especially if you have what you see on the left, non-portable panels. These are much cheaper. They work great. By the way, I do own some of those. But there is one disadvantage with these. These are more weatherproof, and you can. They're very durable, but they're heavier. And if you want to put a panel on the top of your car, for example, those portable ones can do it. They also have grommets in the side, and you can rope them onto your car, and they're not going to scratch your car surface. But this one, you definitely would not want to put up there. As I mentioned, you have different kinds of panel plugs that go into these. And if you do get a panel from a third party, you may need an adapter to make sure it works with your unit. Almost all of these traditional non-portable panels have what's called an MC4 connector. And depending on your brand of power station, you may need an adapter to get that working or connected to your unit. Also, be sure to check the polarity. Sometimes red doesn't always mean the same thing. Could be positive, could be negative, but the manufacturers will usually put a label on the cable to indicate which one's the positive and which one is the negative. So this is especially true with the MC4 connectors, and these are desirable for permanent outdoor installations because they have a rubberized collar in here that keeps moisture out. They're very, very good, very durable, but be aware you may need an adapter to make it work with your unit. Okay, we're just about done. Question is, should you build one of these yourself? I mean, on the surface, you'd say, hey, this is sort of low tech. What is it, a battery, a controller? Although that battery management system may be a little bit beyond our level of technical expertise to come up with. But here's the bottom line. Although some hams I know were concerned about the high cost, the economics suggests that you should not build one yourself. The reason why is that the firms that make these units can buy the components for a lot less than you. Those of you who've been around electronics have probably seen this kind of an example many times. So this is from the Newark Electronics website. Newark, if you're not aware, is a big electronics components distributor. And so this is for a particular Schottky diode that's often used in inverters. And you can see that if you want to buy one of these Schottky diodes, just one, the price is 24.6 cents. If you want to buy 10 or more, all of them, each one is 20.8 cents each. You want to buy 50 or more? Well, the price drops to 9 cents each. And then look at the bottom. You buy 1,000 or more, the cost is 4.1 cents each. So the question is, how can they get away with this? How can they do this? Well, this is partly the result of the laws of economics, if you will. If you've taken Economics 101, microeconomics, you price on the basis of your marginal cost, not your average cost. Marginal cost being the cost of making or selling the next unit, not averaging out all the costs you've already incurred. So it also reflects here one of the few ways in which you can legally engage in pricing discrimination in the United States. We have what's called the Robinson-Patman Act, which means you have to offer the same terms and prices to everybody in the geographic areas you sell in within the country. There are a few exceptions. One of the exceptions is that you can discriminate based on a quantity price like this, where you can recognize efficiencies in distribution or shipping costs. The second area, which does not apply here, is that you can discriminate based on certain affinity groups, provided everyone who's eligible for it can get it. An affinity group might be like senior citizen discounts or student discounts or discounts for members of the active military, but you have to offer it to anyone in the US who meets that category, not just active military in Alabama, because we like that state, okay? But basically, the manufacturers of solar generators are buying parts in much greater quantities than you will ever buy, and they are reaping the economies of scale from that. So here's a closing argument here. Here's a great lithium iron phosphate battery. You've all seen this, Bioenno. I love them. I have 3 Bioenno batteries. They're all 40 amp hour. So here it's $570 for 720 watt hours of great power. On the other hand, you can buy a portable power station with 716 watt hours, essentially the same, also lithium iron phosphate. And here you can see it's $599. Click here to apply an $80 coupon and the price is $519. Think about the value of your time and think about also safety. If you're going to have somebody else in your household operating one of these devices, maybe your spouse or even kids, do you want a device that is homebrew, maybe not fully tested or easy to use? Think about them as well. And you probably will decide that maybe it's just better to buy one of these while this price war is going on. And if you do have a custom need for a solar generator, and I do know of a couple of people who have, these are boaters. They needed specialized units for their boats. And they have all admitted they've spent a lot more getting the parts and building that for their ships. Okay, so we're done. I hope you got more familiar with these devices for powering things other than your radios, like your computers, your phones, and whatever. And if you do have access to solar power because of where you live, go for it. Here in Southern California, we have plenty of solar opportunities. So I thank you all for listening, and I'm open for any comments or questions before Dan closes the net.
Well, I've been known to go over a little bit too on a good presentation, of which this is. Thank you very much, Diana. Okay, we got, Marty, you got your hand up. You go first.
Thank you. And Diana, thank you so much for a great presentation. I was giving a talk on preparing your house for power outages to Aries a couple of weeks ago, and there were questions about solar power. So I said, come and watch this one for solar generators. And it was indeed very informative. One of the things in taking a quick look at the various units on the market, I noticed is that, again, the ability to take in charge power is somewhat limited, especially compared with some of the the charging we do on some of our big lithium iron phosphate batteries. There were some depending on the size, you can take 800 watts or 400 watts, or the one you pointed out, 200. People need to realize that about the best you're going to get out of a really good solar panel is about 18 watts per square foot. So take whatever. If you say, "Oh, I want something that'll take up to 800 watts of charge," okay, and you say, "Okay, well, that's like 40 some square feet of panel. Do you have room for that? Can you afford that?" The panels can add. Obviously, the prices have come down a lot, but a good panel, I mean, that can still add considerable cost on the order of more than the cost of the generator. So make sure that you're evaluating all that. And of course, the big deal is recharge time. When you have a gas powered generator, your recharge time is about 2 minutes. That's how long it takes you to fill the tank. So there's definitely room for both. You pointed out many of the advantages of this, but I certainly would not have replace a gasoline generator with this. They each have their purpose.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. As I said, the solar generator is not going to power everything, but for your very most critical, smaller devices, it will work. And of course, you're going to be recharging this during the day. So you start off with a full tank and keep it charged with sunlight, and you can go into the evening hours with it. Also, by having multiple boxes, you can swap them out and have others charging while the others continue working inside the house or elsewhere.
Yeah, I also noticed that I'm sorry. I also noticed that several of them, like the Bluetti, they have add-on the ability to add on additional battery units.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
you could stack them and use them all for extended run, or you could be, I don't know if you could actually charge some while you're using others, but it's modular in that you could build these things to be pretty big if you need it.
Yes, a good point. Bluetti and EcoFlow in their bigger units, generally ones that are over $1,000 and up, have the ability to plug in a second battery. It's not a full unit, but it's just a big battery, and it'll essentially double your capacity. And I'm sure other brands are going to come up with that. But as I said, this is it's past the embryonic stage. It's now in the high growth stage. And as these brands are duking it out for market share, they're going to come up with these other competitive advantages, as Marty said. But just go online to Amazon, and I'm not promoting Amazon, but it's a great place to make comparisons, and you'll just see what's going on. It's wild. Now, having said that, I've also bought several different brands of the portable type solar panels. I bought a RockPals, a Bluetti, and something called Solar Popo, a no brand. Guess what? The Solar Popo was rated at 100 watts. I plugged it into my Bluetti, and late afternoon, not midday, late afternoon, it was giving me 83 watts. It was supposed to give 100 max, but that was pretty good for late afternoon when the sun was almost down at the low horizon at this time of year. On the other hand, the RockPals had a terrible time in the late afternoon sun. It was only giving me 37 watts. And the Bluetti gave a pretty respectable rating, almost about 88% of its rated capacity. So you never know with these units. You'll find plenty of complaints from people. There is no industry association. There are no solar standards for this. You have to take the word of these companies that their units are rated as they are. But that's what happens in the earlier phases of a market where you have a lot of young upstart companies and they're all fighting it out. Some of them are not going to live for another 5 years if there is some kind of industry consolidation. As I mentioned, some power tool companies may come in. That's my speculation. The question is, when does somebody like Honda come into this picture? Honda can still sell their gasoline generators in 49 other states, but at some point, they may recognize that there are a number of construction applications where you can't have a generator working indoors and you need this kind of power at a job site. Okay, anyone else?
Follow-up question, if I may.
Yes.
Have you, since solar panels come in a variety of flavors in terms of nominal voltage, 20, 12, 24, 48, like the ones that go on the roof are usually 48. Have you found, is there a limit on the voltage rating of the panels that go into these, they go into the charge port of these things, and are they configured to make use of that higher voltage?
Okay, good question. All of these units have some kind of maximum voltage rating for a solar panel. All of my portable panels stay within this under 29 volts and will work very well. But yeah, there are some, I suppose, some roof-mounted type panels that operate at a much higher voltage, and you probably wouldn't be carrying those around much with a portable unit.
Okay, let's pick up some more people here. Before we do, hang on, you guys, with the hands up. Barry, let's go into the chat and see what you got.
Sure. There's a couple of questions from Roger and Steve and a couple of others about clean power. I know a lot of the solar panels produce an awful lot of hash on HF, and most of the times it's the solar controllers that's putting out the hash. Do you have any clean power units that you would recommend so you could use them on HF?
Okay, I have not tested every brand, so I can't answer that. But here's my initial reaction. The solar charge controllers in these boxes are far smaller at much lower wattage than what you're going to have in a household solar charger with all those big panels on your roof. But it's also just to prevent any hash from coming into my radio work. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using bioenno batteries for the radios. And then I use these boxes for everything else. And I can keep, some separation between the box and antenna and radio. So I have not had any problems at this point. But you raise a great question, because the solar charge controllers out here have been implicated in causing a lot of HF hash. But then again, these are large controllers. And also, one of the concerns that have happened here in Southern California among some hams is they want to make sure that city officials get into building permits for a solar system to certify that only FCC Class B rated components will be used instead of using Class A cheaper components, which of course have more interference capability. So I've been through a few battles on that as well. Any other questions? Next.
Speed of charge. How fast can one of these generators recharge your battery?
Okay, well, it depends on the size of your unit. If you have like a 716 watt hour unit like these Bluettis, and you're charging it with no more than 200 watts, that means you're looking at over 3 hours. And sure enough, on the AC mains, when I ran my battery almost down to zero, but not to zero, it took about 3.5 hours. If you have a very small unit, it can recharge much faster because the battery doesn't take that much. So it really is a function, as Marty Wall also said, of the size of your battery that has to be recharged. The bigger batteries are great, but they also take a lot more resources to charge.
Okay, I might
Okay.
add what I've got on my mind. Honda has announced that they're going to get out of the generator business. The regulations and stuff has gotten to where, because of California, they just don't want to compete in that, which means to me that they're going to stay in the market. They're just not going to do gas generators. They're going to do stuff like this. But that's out there.
Wait, Honda has said they're getting out of the generator business?
Yeah, I've forgotten the period of time. They gave a date and the whole thing, but yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Is that just for gasoline powered, or propane powered generators are becoming popular here because that way you don't have to deal with the gasoline issues of stay-bill additives and things like that.
Yeah, they have a whole array of generators. So I don't know if it's going to cover them all or just a certain size, like they're 2,000 or 4,000 or whatever. But they are dropping some, if not all, their lines on generators. Again, I think what that means is they're going to rechannel their efforts in other directions to take up that market.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to check that out. Thank you, Dan, for that. Any other comments? I see
Is there
Roger.
an optimal ratio between wattage and capacity of the battery to be charged?
I'm sorry, read that again.
Is there an optimal ratio between wattage and capacity of the battery to be charged?
I think they sort of go hand in hand, but I think in terms of charging, if there's a maximum limit of how much power can come in, you have to relate that to what's the watt hour rating of your battery, and that begins to tell you what is the required time to fully recharge. Now, keep in mind, not everybody runs their battery down to the bottom. If you're only half empty, it doesn't take that much time, maybe an hour to go back up to the top. So I don't have an ideal number. You just have to take the dynamics of each unit. Now, having said that, the EcoFlow brand has been promoting their technology, which claims they can recharge even these big units, not the biggest units, but sizable ones like 800 watt hours, up to 80% of capacity within 1 hour. So I don't know how their circuitry works. As I mentioned, there's a lot of opaqueness in this whole market. You never see photos of the insides of these units, and it is what it is.
Okay, let's jump over and catch Roger real quick. He's got his hand up, and I see Dan's also got his up. Hi, Dan. Go ahead, Roger.
Hey, I was just going to say, thank you, Diane, for putting on this presentation. Let you know, I do have a Bluetti. It's an AC200 Max. It actually has a 30 amp DC output, and it all has supposedly has clean power. But as I was chatting with Steve, the problem I've seen, it meets the FCC regulations for RFI radiated, but if you connect to the unit and try to do an HF, you can forget it. There's so much hash from the battery management system and the inverter. And I contacted Bluetti right after I got the unit in and started doing tests and sent them some pictures from a spectrum analyzer of what the power looked like. And their response was, all our units are like that. We don't have one that has clean power for operating HF radios. Just for that, that's all I have.
Okay. Yeah, well, for most of us who get these units and bring them to a public service event, we won't be using HF. But anyway, yeah, I hear what you're saying. These solar charge controllers have always been an Achilles heel of the solar system. And it's going to get worse here in California because the state enacted another law requiring every new home built in the state to have some kind of solar on its roof, unless the roof cannot support solar panels, or there are some other limiting characteristics like a major building next door that blocks all the sunlight. So everyone out here is going to have to get used to hash from solar charge controllers. And conversely, the solar charge controllers have got to come up with a better method of doing their job. But my fear is that once a controller is installed at a home, and especially if it's a non-ham, they're not going to replace their controller box. As far as they're concerned, it's a sunk cost, and they'll continue working it until it fails. And that's also, by the way, pretty much the strategy with the electric utility companies here. They don't replace transformers until they blow, and it's a reality.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw a comment. Was there a comment someone
Go
made
ahead.
about?
Hang on, Dan. Let's go back to comments for a little bit. Barry?
Most of the stuff is just comments. It's anything that we need to read. They can read them later. I just go ahead and put the hands.
Okay.
We've answered all of the questions.
Okay, there was someone that I saw a comment at the bottom of the screen about Honda. Someone made a chat comment. I can't see that on my screen now.
Yes, as Honda has started and will continue to sell the remainder of their lawn and garden products line in the industrial type and so on and so forth. Why go ahead and pick that one up, Barry?
He's just basically saying that Honda is going to continue to sell its home and lawn and garden products and industrial type power products. And we'll see what happens. We'll just have to wait.
Well, the important thing that I was pointing out was that they did not announce that they're stopping to make generators. They announced that they're stopping to make lawnmowers.
Yes.
Yeah.
That I knew. Yeah, lawnmowers also will have to be electrically driven here as well.
Well, this particular program I got mine from was a YouTube, and if it's on the internet, it's got to be true, right? Their whole thing, what they talk to YouTube around, is generators and things like that, and they were saying how they're going to be really missing the Honda and all about that. So that's where I got my information from. Who knows?
Okay, I'm just looking at some chats here while we're going. Michigan DTE, is that Detroit? It used to be Detroit. DTE is actively trying to
Yes,
stop.
DTE Energy, which is Detroit Edison. Yeah.
Okay, actively trying to stop solar installations, claiming solar users are freeloading on the distribution network. Yeah, here in Southern California, SoCal Edison is changing the rules on solar power starting this summer. And the way the systems work now is that you can have solar panels on your roof, and any excess power you're not consuming goes into the grid, and you get a credit on your electric bill. And some people are paying almost nothing for electricity every month because they generate more than they need. But Edison realizes, yeah, just like DTE, they're on the short end of the stick. So they're going to dramatically cut back on the benefits that solar users will have from a system like that.
Hey,
Okay,
Dan,
let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
let's pick up Dan. He's been hanging out there for a long time. He's not very patient.
Diana, thank you for the absolutely erudite cost analysis of why mass manufacturing is less expensive than home brewing things like this. That was spot on. And there are a couple of questions that came up that if you get hold of California Public Utilities Commission Rule 21, it details the regulatory environment you have to comply with if you're going to be feeding power back into the grid from a solar system. And it was one of the most painful things I ever subjected myself to. But now that I did, I'm making money because I'm producing more power than we're using with a 7.4 kilowatt hour ground mounted array and 6 lithium ferrous phosphate 3.8 kilowatt hour batteries. But for portable use, I have 3 battery boxes I built myself. 2 of them are 200 amp hour lithium ferrous phosphate. One of them is 100 amp hour. And I have one in the truck that's charged every time the engine is running. And I hope I never find out how long that 200 amp hours last. And here in the house, I just, keep an eyeball on the little cheap meters going in and out of the chargers on the 200 amp hour box and the 100 amp hour box that I'm also using as filters for the radios here. So solar power is there, whether you use it or not. And any effort you make to use it is spot on, to the point where if you can't do it with a backpack, but if you're going to show up with a large sedan or a truck and set something up, you can certainly afford 1 or 2 of the 160 or 70 amp hour monocrystalline. They even have flexible ones now, like you mentioned, with grommets on them that size, and just hook those up to 100 amp hour or any kind of battery. And you'll get through the night if you need to, if you've got any daylight at all. So thanks a lot. This was a really good presentation.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, some more comments there. Steve's commenting about the controller. I might add to that before we go into there. At my cabin, I have no commercial power. It's strictly sun or generator. That's all the power I got up there. And I have and had HF's equipment up there for some time, and I haven't had the hash problem. But I'm using MPPT controllers. I have 2 of them in parallel, and they work back and forth, and they got solar panels at different parts because this thing goes behind the mountain, and it's only set in one place, and when it's not in the other, and so forth. But I have not had the problem, and I'm using MPPT controllers.
Yeah, and by the way, almost all these devices have MPPT solar controllers built in. You don't have to buy an external one. On the other hand, for my Bioenno battery, I am charging that. I have a solar panel for that, but I did buy from PowerWorks a MPPT controller external to hook up to the solar panel, then going into the Bioenno battery. And never hook up a panel directly to a battery. You need a charge controller.
Yes.
But so far, I've not had a problem with MPPT. And as I mentioned, these are far smaller devices than you're going to find in a whole house solar controller.
Yeah, the bigger the system, the bigger the headache. You got to really watch your battery loading and how it's set up and all kinds of stuff when you got a bigger system. The smaller systems aren't quite so that way. Dan, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
On the smaller systems, you want to be sure you got a low voltage cutoff. And that's a big deal because the number of cycles of lithium-based batteries, well, lithium ferrous phosphate are the only ones I've studied enough to be able to say anything with confidence. But a cycle for them is the equivalent of 100% charge to 0% charge. Whereas AGM and any other acid-based battery, a full cycle is only 50%.
Yes.
From 100% to 50% state of charge. So the house batteries I've got have a 10,000 cycle or a 10-year warranty to not go below 80% state of charge from their designated manufactured capacity. And we're never going to get anywhere near 10,000 cycles in my lifetime, much less the first 10 years. So you got to be careful that you do have low voltage cutoff on portable stuff because you can ruin batteries quickly by completely depleting them. And that was an issue for all the Arden installations where they were using small batteries and panels way high up on mountains and sometimes way high up on towers on mountains. So the Arden, well, the most common manufacturer of the Arden microwave radios shut themselves down at 10.4 volts. It's a nominal 24-volt system. But even then, you don't want to risk the batteries that you went to the trouble to put up on a high tower on a high mountain by letting them die. So you want to make sure you have a low voltage cutoff at 10.5 or 11 volts if it's one of the newer kinds of batteries.
Well, temperature and everything else takes place there. There's a whole gamut when you talk batteries for solar systems. There's a whole science on that. Monty, take it up.
Okay, just a quick comment. People were talking earlier about the noise generated from the whole house systems. The San Diego Aries had a very good talk with detail about this on which manufacturers are a problem, which ones aren't, and what the problematic ones can and are doing. If you go to YouTube and look up San Diego Aries, their channel includes that talk, which was recorded. It was given back in January. So there's another set of data points for you.
That was a good presentation. I learned a lot from it too.
Okay, how we doing, Barry, in the chat?
Okay, there's one more question. Any good strategies to deal with the limitation to not charge lithium ferrous or LiFePO4 at less than 32 degrees Fahrenheit?
Well, for one thing, at less than 32 degrees, you might not have much sunlight, so it may not be even doable at that time if you have snow, cloud cover, and whatever. Well, that's, you know,
I can
here's
comment on
another-
that.
You can keep your unit indoors and run a cable outside to your panels. And because these units can be charged inside. I have 30 and 40 foot MC4 connector cables, so I can keep a unit in the kitchen and then run it through the back door to go out into the backyard where the panels are. That would be my suggestion for managing colder weather.
Yeah. I had extensive conversations with the Bioenno folks about this because we were looking at using some of their batteries at a mountaintop repeater location. And of course, solar panels, of course, love to be in clear, cold weather. They are more efficient when they're cool. But the batteries themselves, even though there may be a stated limit in terms of operating temperature, Bioenno has said they will operate and charge well below that published limit. It's only a matter of, maybe the reactions, like any chemical reaction, will take place more slowly at lower temperatures, but there is really not an absolute cutoff. They say they will work well down below zero. So, but I think Diana's idea of having the panels outside and the battery inside is great. But that information came from Bioenno about using those batteries in extreme temperatures.
Yeah, that's a great point, because also from my observation of these solar generators, at least the ones I've seen, and looking at the ones online, these are not weatherproofed units. These were meant for more moderate weather or indoor use. And that's why I said earlier, if I had to speculate who would come in, somebody like a DeWalt or a Milwaukee will probably come up with a ruggedized unit so that contractors can use these boxes in all kinds of different construction settings. But so far, nobody has a ruggedized unit. These are not built to military MILSTAR standards at all. As I mentioned, it's a Wild West still. So there still is some uncertainty about the durability of it, but time will tell how it comes out. In the end, though, I think consumers are well served by these. We certainly benefited here during the 17-hour power outage we had in December. And as I said, if you have a medical device in your house you may want to consider these as well. So your device continues to run regardless of whether you have commercial mains power or not.
Okay, Dan, hang on for a second. Steve, pick it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment there on the battery management systems that's in all of these lithium iron phosphate configurations. And if you go on Amazon and look carefully, you can see some very low amperage heaters that will allow the battery management system to continue to charge the battery below whatever stated limit or whatever real limit that is. I wouldn't expect you guys in California to even think about that, but it is a real problem. If you leave those batteries outside, they just won't. They'll run, but they won't charge because the battery management system that's built in to the batteries will not allow that. But a lot of manufacturers, if you go to Amazon, you can find them. Battleborn, there's a bunch of them that have heaters that are low amperage and that will keep the battery warm enough if you cannot put it inside, or you can't keep it above, let's say 29, 30 degrees. You can buy, I'm trying to think, I can't think of the names of the brands right offhand, but they're all over Amazon. All you have to do is look. And on the interference, Barry Porter made a comment. He's down there in Miami where he's got a lot of floater boater friends, and I know that they curse those that use HF radio curse their inverters, and there are methodologies to suppress. There's methodologies to suppress the noise that comes out of those things, but buying a brand that has that realization before you have to deal with it is, and they're expensive, is probably a better option. Now, whether they're incorporated in these made up units, I don't know. I don't have any experience with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve. Dan, go ahead and pick it up.
I think some of the newest battery management systems will have their own internal heaters inside the battery shell. And I've been dealing with it using, we had some old heat lamps for our chickens and our chicks when we would get day-old chicks. And so I've got thermocubes that cost, I don't know, $5-6 each that turn on at 35 degrees Fahrenheit and turn off at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm just about to, and I don't know, they have a few hundred hours, maybe 1,000 or 2 hours of life. I'm about to replace them with a couple of solid ceramic things that are not glass and don't have breakable filaments that are good for 30,000 hours of continuous use that are used for heating solariums for reptiles that need a lot of heat. because they'll fit in a standard medium socket, just like the heat lamps. And we see zero every year here in the middle of sunny California. And we're only up at 1,600 and some feet. So there you go, Steve. I think that's the first time I've heard you say something I can challenge.
Well, here in Idaho and many other states, we have a lot of very high mountains. They've got solar powered commercial and amateur radio repeaters. And of course, keeping those batteries up, that they are not on commercial power. They either got to be on a generator of some type or battery. And a lot of them have gone to batteries. And they found a way around the heat thing. There's ways of doing that. Okay, we've been on here quite a while, but this has been a great one. Is there anything more going on in chat there, Barry?
I got one more question. What do you set the low voltage cutoff to on a deep cycle marine battery?
10.5 if it's like an AGM.
Okay.
That's right.
That's pretty standard AGMs in the milk and the marina. Okay, anybody else? Barry?
No, that's good in chat.
He's a
Lots of good questions in there. Lots of good comments for people to read later.
Yes, and it's been a great presentation. Thank you, Dan. We'll have to have you on for more. Hang in there. We'll find out what all your expertise is and have you come back.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You've been a great audience and great questions. And it'd be interesting 5 years from now to see who is still in business and who has come into business since today. So stay tuned for more.